One act of honesty, one dangerous debt, one man who never forgets a face. Ella Peters came to New York for a degree, not a death warrant. But when she returns a lost wallet to the coldest man in Manhattan, she doesn't get a thank you, she gets claimed. Dong-ha doesn't believe in coincidences, and he doesn't believe in kindness. In his world, everything has a price, and now he's decided Ella is the only prize worth keeping. If you crave dark, interracial mafia romance where loyalty is deadlier than betrayal, you won't want to miss a single page. Follow Ella's journey from the barside to the bedside of New York's most feared boss. Now, the quiet Nigerian student is no longer just a face in the crowd. She is the obsession of a man who takes what he wants and kills what he can't control. In a city of 8 million people, there is nowhere to hide when a mafia boss decides your soul is the one thing he can't live without. If you love high-stakes interracial romance where doing the right thing leads to the most delicious kind of danger, this story is for you. The air in Lumiere was thick with the scent of expensive bourbon and lingering perfume. Ella Peters wiped the mahogany bar for the 100th time, her muscles aching from an 8-hour shift. In the soft glow of the amber pendant lights, she looked every bit the quietly beautiful woman her coworkers admired. Tall, with skin the color of deep espresso and eyes that missed nothing. She was thinking about her tuition deadline when she saw it. A slim, obsidian leather wallet tucked into the corner of a velvet booth. Ella walked over and picked it up. It was heavy, cool to the touch, and smelled of sandalwood and old money. A quick glance inside revealed a stack of $100 bills that could pay her rent for a year, but it was the small, gold-embossed dragon on the inner flap that made her pulse stutter. Ella, we're
Coming?
locking up, her manager called out. Coming, she replied, sliding the wallet into her apron. Her roommates would call her a fool. They didn't understand the weight of a name, the discipline her father had drilled into her back in Lagos. Honesty is a shield, he used to say. As she stepped out into the biting New York wind, Ella didn't feel like she had found a fortune. She felt like she was holding a live wire. Koreatown at 2 a.m. was a neon-soaked fever dream. Ella stood before the Jade Room, a private club with no sign on the door, only two massive men in tailored suits guarding the entrance. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. I'm here to return something, she said, her Nigerian accent thickening with her nerves. To the man who sat in the corner booth at Lumiere tonight. The guards exchanged a look, not of boredom but of sharp, lethal alertness. One of them spoke into a lapel mic. Moments later, the heavy iron doors creaked open. The interior was silent, a stark contrast to the chaos of the street. At the end of a long, marble hallway sat a man behind a desk of reclaimed oak. This was Dong-ha. He didn't look like a thug, he looked like an emperor. His hair was slicked back, his suit was worth more than her education, and his eyes were as cold as a winter morning in the Atlantic. You have something of mine, he said. It wasn't a question. Ella stepped forward, her gait steady despite the trembling in her hands. She placed the wallet on the desk. You left this at the bar. Dong-ha didn't look at the wallet, he looked at her. He tracked the column of her neck, the set of her shoulders, and the way she refused to cast her eyes downward. He reached out, flipping the wallet open with a manicured thumb. The money was untouched. The coded ledger, the real prize, was undisturbed. Do you know what is in here, Ella
Do you know
Peters?
what is in here,
He asked,
Ella Peters?
reading her name from the ID she hadn't realized he'd already scrutinized. Money and things that don't belong to me, she replied simply. Dong-ha stood up. He was taller than he looked sitting down, a predatory grace in his movement. He walked around the desk, stopping just inches from her. The scent of sandalwood enveloped her. In this city, people kill for a fraction of what is in this leather, he whispered, his voice a low vibration. Why bring it back? Because it wasn't mine to keep, she said. A slow, dangerous smile spread across his face. Integrity, a rare, beautiful, and very expensive habit. The next morning, the encounter felt like a dream, until Ella walked out of her apartment. A black SUV was idling at the curb. It followed her to the subway. It was there when she exited at 42nd Street for her morning lectures. Ella tried to focus on her macroeconomics notes, but all she could see were Dong-ha's eyes. She felt marked. When she arrived at work that evening, there was a bouquet of white lilies waiting at the bar. No card, just the flowers pure and jarring against the dark wood. "Who are those
Who are
from?"
those
her
from? A
coworker
secret
Sarah
admirer?
teased.
I
"A
don't
secret
think admire
admirer."
is the right word.
"I don't think admirer is the right word," Ella murmured. As the sun set, the sense of being watched intensified. She saw the same man from the club standing across the street, motionless. She wasn't just a girl who returned a wallet anymore. She was a curiosity to a man who didn't have hobbies, only targets. The night shift was ending when the predatory landlord of Ella's apartment building, Mr. Henderson, cornered her in the alleyway behind the restaurant. He had been reminding her about the rent increase for weeks, his hands always lingering too long on her arm. "I know you're struggling, Ella," he sneered, blocking her path. "Maybe we can work out a different payment plan tonight." Ella's stomach turned. "Move, Mr. Henderson. I'll have the money by Monday." He reached for her, his grip bruising. "Don't play hard to get, you." He didn't finish. A hand, encased in a black leather glove, clamped onto Henderson's shoulder. Dong-ha appeared from the shadows like a ghost. He didn't look angry, he looked bored, which was infinitely more terrifying. She said, "Move," Dong-ha said softly. With a sickening crack, Henderson's scream was cut short as Dong-ha twisted his arm. He leaned into the landlord's ear. "If you breathe the same air as her again, I will harvest your organs while you are still awake to watch." He let the man collapse and turned to Ella. "You are late for your walk home, Ella Peters." The alleyway was silent except for the ragged breathing of Mr. Henderson as he scrambled away into the night. Ella stood frozen, her back pressed against the cold brick of the restaurant. Dong-ha remained perfectly still, his silhouette cutting a sharp, lethal figure against the city lights. "You shouldn't have done that," Ella whispered, her voice trembling. "He's my landlord. Now I have nowhere to stay." Dong-ha stepped closer, the scent of sandalwood and expensive tobacco moving with him. "You had nowhere to stay the moment he laid hands on you. Men like that do not stop until they are broken." He reached out, his gloved fingers hovering just an inch from her cheek, never quite touching. It was a gesture of restraint that felt more intimate than a caress.
Go home,
"Go
Ella.
home, Ella.
My men will ensure
My
your
men
things are
will
moved to a
ensure
secure
your things
location
are
by
moved
morning.
to a
I didn't
secure
ask for your
location
help.
by morning." "I didn't ask for your help," she argued, her Nigerian pride flaring despite her fear. "You returned my loyalty," Dong-ha replied, his eyes narrowing. "In my world that makes you mine to protect. Sleep well, little bird." Ella didn't sleep. She spent the night in her small room, clutching her Bible and staring at the door. By 8 a.m., a knock came, not from the landlord, but from a woman in a sharp gray suit.
Miss Peter, I am
"Ms.
Gina,
Peters,
legal counsel
I
for
am
the Choi
Jinnah,
estate.
legal counsel for the Choi estate," the woman said, handing Ella a folder. Inside were the deeds to a luxury apartment in Long Island City, and more shockingly, a revised student visa application. The red tape that had been strangling Ella's future for months had been cleared with a single, unofficial stamp. "Mr. Choi doesn't like his interests being interrupted by bureaucracy," Jinnah explained. Ella felt a chill. This wasn't a gift, it was a cage made of gold. By accepting this, she was no longer just an immigrant student. She was becoming an asset. She realized then that Dong-ha hadn't just returned her favor. He was systematically removing every reason she had to say no to him. The new apartment was a glass-walled sanctuary overlooking the East River. It was beautiful, sterile, and heavily guarded. For 3 days, Ella didn't see Dong-ha, but she felt him everywhere. The fridge was stocked with the specific Nigerian spices she liked. The bookshelf held the textbooks she had mentioned wanting but couldn't afford. He was studying her. On the 4th night, the elevator dinned. Dong Ha walked in, looking weary, his tie loosened and a dark stain on his cuff that Ella knew wasn't wine. "Do you like the view?" he asked, walking to the floor-to-ceiling window. "It's a prison with a nice sunset," Ella said, standing her ground. "Why are you doing this? I'm just a bartender." Dong Ha turned, his gaze heavy and dark. "You are the only person in this city who looked at $1 million and saw a burden instead of a prize. I need that light near me, Ella, even if I have to burn everything else down to keep it." The tension in the room was a living thing. Ella walked toward him, her heart thumping a frantic rhythm. She wanted to hate him for his violence, for the way he moved people like chess pieces. But when she looked into his eyes, she saw a profound, echoing loneliness that mirrored her own. "You can't buy a person's soul, Dong Ha," she said softly, stopping just a breath away from him. "I'm not buying it," he rasped, his hand finally making contact, sliding into the thick curls at the nape of her neck. "I'm claiming it." He leaned down, his lips brushing hers in a way that was both a question and a command. Ella should have pulled away. She should have remembered her prayers, her family, her American dream. But the heat radiating from him was a vacuum pulling her in. When his mouth crashed against hers, it wasn't soft. It tasted of danger and desperation, a forbidden collision of two worlds that should never have met. The kiss deepened, turning into a frantic struggle for air and dominance. Dong Ha's hands were everywhere, mapping her curves, gripping her waist with a possessiveness that made Ella gasp. He lifted her easily, setting her on the marble kitchen island, his body wedging between her thighs. For the first time, the disciplined Ella Peters let go. She wrapped her arms around his neck, her fingers tangling in his silken hair. In the darkness of the apartment, the boundaries between right and wrong blurred. But the moment was shattered by the shrill ring of Dong Ha's phone. He pulled back, his breathing ragged, his eyes glowing with a feral intensity. He answered, his voice turning back to ice in a split second. "Speaker." A pause, his face hardened into a mask of stone. "The Italians hit the warehouse. Kill them all. I'll be there in 20 minutes. He looked at Ella, his thumb tracing her swollen lower lip. "Stay inside. The war has started, and you are the only thing I cannot afford to lose." The silence of the apartment was louder than the gunfire Ella imagined echoing across the city. Dong Ha had been gone for 6 hours. Every time a siren wailed in the distance, Ella flinched, her mind racing with images of the man who had kissed her with such desperation being laid out on a cold slab. She tried to pray, but the words felt heavy. How could she ask for the safety of a man who had just ordered a massacre? She paced the length of the glass walls, watching the black water of the East River. She was a woman of peace, a daughter of a deacon, yet her skin still burned where his hands had been. At 4 a.m., the elevator dinked. Ella whirled around, expecting Dong Ha. Instead, 3 men she didn't recognize stepped out. They weren't wearing the polished suits of Dong Ha's guards. These men wore leather jackets and carried the stench of cheap cigarettes and malice. "Mr. Choi's little African prize," the leader sneered, clicking a switchblade open. "He's been very busy tonight. We thought we'd give him one more thing to worry about." Ella didn't scream. Years of navigating the rougher parts of Lagos had taught her that fear was a scent predators tracked. She backed toward the kitchen, her eyes darting for a weapon. "Stay back," she said, her voice low and steady. The men laughed, closing the distance. The leader reached for her, but Ella didn't cower. She grabbed a heavy glass carafe from the counter and smashed it against the marble. The sound was like a gunshot. She held the jagged remains out, her knuckles white. "I said stay back." The men paused, surprised by the fire in her eyes, but they were professionals. Before she could swing, the front door was kicked off its hinges. A hail of suppressed gunfire shredded the air. 2 of the intruders dropped instantly. The third tried to use Ella as a shield, but a bullet found his shoulder first, spinning him away. Dong Ha stood in the doorway, a literal demon in a ruined suit. He didn't wait for his men to clear the room. He walked straight to Ella, his eyes scanning her for a single scratch. "Are you hurt?" Dongha's voice was a jagged edge. "I'm fine," Ella whispered, though the carafe slipped from her hand, shattering on the floor. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by a cold, numbing shock. She looked at the bodies on her beautiful rug. "You killed them, right here." "They came for you, Ella," he said, stepping over the gore to take her face in his hands. His palms were warm, stained with a fine mist of blood that he hadn't had time to wipe away. "The O'Malley syndicate thinks you are my weakness. They think they can use you to break my hold on the docks." "Am I?" she asked, her eyes searching his. "Your weakness?" Dongha pulled her against his chest, burying his face in the crook of her neck. He was trembling, not with fear, but with a rage so potent it felt like a physical heat. "You are the only thing in this world that isn't a transaction, Ella. That makes you more dangerous than any bullet." He took her to a secondary location, a fortified brownstone in Brooklyn that felt less like a hotel and more like a bunker. This was his inner sanctum, where the air was thick with the history of the Choi family. For the first time, Ella saw the weight he carried. He sat in a high-backed chair, allowing a medic to stitch a graze on his arm. He didn't flinch, his gaze fixed on Ella as she sat across from him, wrapped in a silk robe that was far too large for her. "I can't go back to my old life, can I?" she asked quietly. "No," Dongha admitted. "The moment you returned that wallet, the thread was pulled. You are part of the tapestry now." The honesty was brutal, yet Ella preferred it to a lie. She walked over to him, taking the needle and thread from the startled medic. Her hands were steady now. She began to close the wound on his arm, her movements precise. "In my village, we
In my
say that
village,
when
we
you
say that
save a
when you
life,
save a
you are
life,
responsible
you
for
are
it," she
responsible for
murmured.
it.
"But you didn't save me. You trapped me." Dongha watched her work, fascinated by the contrast of her dark skin against his pale, scarred arm. The intimacy of the moment was suffocating. When she finished the last stitch, she didn't pull away. "If I am to stay," Ella said, looking him dead in the eye, "I am not a ghost in your house. I am not a secret you hide. If I am the boss's woman, I will be treated as such." A flash of admiration crossed Dongha's face. He stood up, towering over her, and looped a heavy gold chain around her neck. It bore the same dragon emblem as his wallet. "You want the crown, Ella. It is heavy. It is made of thorns." "I've carried heavier things on my head back home," she countered. He laughed then, a short, dark sound, and pulled her into a kiss that tasted of iron and silk. He pushed her back against the mahogany table, his hands sliding under the robe. This time there were no phone calls, no interruptions. There was only the desperate, rhythmic collision of two souls who had accepted their fate. In the heart of the underworld, Ella Peters found a different kind of American dream, one where she was no longer invisible, but a queen in a kingdom of shadows. The boardroom of the Choi Syndicate was a vacuum of sound. 6 men, all veterans of the Korean underworld, sat around a table that had seen more death warrants than business contracts. When Ella walked in behind Dongha, the air curdled. She wore a tailored suit of emerald green, her hair braided back in a crown that made her look like West African royalty. A woman, in the inner circle, Elder Park, a man whose face was a roadmap of scars, spat on the floor. "Dongha, you let your blood run hot and your brain run soft." Dongha didn't raise his voice. He simply pulled out the chair at his right hand for Ella. "She found the ledger when none of you could keep track of it. She saw the leak in the Lumiere books before my own accountants did." Ella sat, her back a straight line of steel. She didn't look at the floor. She looked at Park. "The numbers don't lie, sir. Your logistics fees have increased by 15% while the shipments have decreased. Either you are losing your touch or you are stealing from the boss." The room went lethal. Park reached for his waistband, but Dongha's hand was already on the table, holding a steak knife he had been using for his fruit. He didn't move, but the threat was a physical weight. "Let her finish," Dongha whispered. Ella pulled a tablet from her bag. She had spent the last week analyzing the legitimate side of Dong Ha's empire, the shipping lanes and the import-export firms. "You're using the port of Newark," Ella said, her voice resonant. "But the Italian families have the unions there. You're paying a protection tax that is bleeding you dry. Back home, when the main road is blocked, we use the river." She flicked a map
The
onto the
smaller pier in
screen.
Yonkers.
The smaller
It's
piers in
overlooked and owned by a
Yonkers. They
Nigerian
are
consortium I know.
overlooked, underpoliced, and owned by a Nigerian consortium I happen to know. They don't care about Italian politics. They care about respect and cash. Dong Ha leaned back, a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. The elders looked at the map, then at each other. They hated her for being an outsider, but they loved money more than they hated her. "If this fails," Park growled, "her head is on the block." "If it works," Dong Ha countered, "you owe her an apology, on your knees." Success brought a target larger than the one she already carried. The Yonkers route was a gold mine, and suddenly Ella was more than a mistress, she was a strategist. But with power came the isolation she had feared. Late one night, while Dong Ha was at the docks, Ella found a burner phone taped under the mahogany desk in the library. It buzzed. A text message appeared. "The girl is the key. Move when the boss is at the warehouse." Her heart hammered. It wasn't the Italians. It was an inside job. Someone in the Choi family was selling her out to clear the distraction from Dong Ha's side. She heard a footstep behind her. She didn't turn around. She grabbed a heavy bronze bust of a scholar from the shelf. "I wouldn't do that, Miss Peters," a familiar voice said. It was Jinnah, the lawyer, but she wasn't holding a briefcase. She was holding a suppressed Glock. "You're too smart for your own good. Dong Ha was supposed to be a king, not a romantic." "You think
You
he'll
think
choose
he
the
will choose his
empire over me?"
empire over
Ella
me?
asked, her mind racing. She backed toward the window, the NYC skyline mocking her with its distant beauty. "I think he won't have a choice," Jinnah said calmly. "By the time he gets back, you'll be a tragic casualty of an Italian hit. He'll burn the city down in grief, which is exactly the distraction we need to take over the board." Suddenly, the building shook. An explosion rocked the lower floors. Smoke began to curl under the library door. Jinnah frowned, her composure breaking for a split second. That was all Ella needed. She didn't run away, she ran at Jinnah. She used her height, slamming her shoulder into the smaller woman's chest. They tumbled to the floor as the fire alarm began its rhythmic scream. The gun skittered across the polished wood, disappearing into the shadows. "You underestimate a woman who had to fight for a bus seat in Lagos," Ella hissed, pinning Jinnah's wrists. "You're a shark, but I've lived in the ocean." The library was an oven. The smell of burning paper, Dong Ha's history, filled Ella's lungs. She had Jinnah subdued, but the exit was a wall of flame. "We're going to die here," Jinnah shrieked, her face contorted in terror. "Not today," Ella muttered. She grabbed a heavy velvet curtain, dousing it with the water from a decorative fountain in the corner. She wrapped it around herself and the woman who had tried to kill her. She burst through the library doors into a hellscape of orange and black. She dragged Jinnah toward the service elevator, her skin blistering, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Just as the heat became unbearable, the elevator doors slid open. Dong Ha was there, covered in soot and blood, looking like a man who had crawled out of the grave. He saw Ella, his face breaking into an expression of pure, unadulterated agony and relief. He reached through the flames, his hands catching hers, pulling her into the metal car just as the ceiling collapsed behind them. He didn't look at the traitor Jinnah. He only looked at Ella's singed hair and burned hands. "I told you," he choked out, pressing his forehead to hers as the elevator descended. "I told you this crown was made of thorns." "Then we bleed together," Ella whispered, before the darkness took her. The hospital room was a sterile sanctuary of white light and beeping monitors. Ella's hands were swathed in thick bandages, the cool cream beneath them fighting the fire still dancing in her nerves. She didn't have to open her eyes to know he was there. The scent of sandalwood and the heavy, electric pull of his presence told her everything. Dong-ha sat by her bed, his head bowed. For the first time, he looked breakable. The iron boss was gone, replaced by a man haunted by the sight of his world nearly consuming the only thing he cherished. "Jinnah is being dealt with," he said, his voice a gravelly whisper, "and the elders who backed her." "I don't want to hear about the death, Dong-ha," Ella murmured, her voice parched. He looked up, his eyes bloodshot. "Then what do you want to hear? That I can let you go, that I can send you back to your bar and your books and pretend I didn't ruin you?" Ella looked at her bandaged hands. "You didn't ruin me, you revealed me, but I won't be a trophy kept in a burning house." 3 days later, Ella was back in the Brooklyn brownstone. The war with the Italians and the internal purge had left the Choice Syndicate wounded but lethal. Dong-ha was preparing for a final meeting, a sit-down to carve up the city once and for all. "I'm going with you," Ella stated, watching him holster his weapon. "No, it's a slaughterhouse, Ella, not a boardroom." "You said I was the key," she countered, stepping into his space. She wore a high-collared black dress, her regal bearing undiminished by the silk wraps on her hands. "If you go there as a warlord, the cycle never ends. Go there with a partner. Show them that the Choi family has expanded beyond the old ways." Dong-ha gripped her waist, his thumbs tracing the line of her ribs. "If they see you as my heart, they will aim for you first." "Then let them see that your heart is made of Nigerian iron," she replied. The meeting took place in the refrigerated basement of a meatpacking plant, a cliché of the underworld that felt chillingly real. The heads of the 5 families sat opposite Dong-ha, their breath visible in the freezing air. When Ella sat beside him, a ripple of laughter went around the table. "You brought a girl to a man's grave, Choi," the Italian patriarch sneered. "I brought the woman who halved your shipping costs and doubled my efficiency," Dong-ha said, his hand resting over Ella's on the table. Ella spoke then, her voice cutting through the cold like a blade. She didn't talk of blood, she talked of infrastructure. She laid out a plan for a neutral zone, a logistics hub where all families could profit without the constant drain of street wars. It was a vision of a modernized underworld, one that operated like a shadow government rather than a gang. The room went silent. They weren't looking at a bartender anymore. They were looking at the architect of a new era. The peace lasted exactly 10 minutes. The Italian patriarch's son, a hothead with a grudge, pulled a hidden piece. "We don't take orders from a—" He never finished the sentence. Dong-ha was faster, but the room erupted into a symphony of chaos. Muzzle flashes lit the dark basement. Dong-ha threw his body over Ella, slamming her to the floor as bullets shredded the chair where she had sat. Stay down! But Ella saw the flanker, a man moving through the hanging carcasses with a silencer. She didn't have a gun, but she had the environment. She grabbed a steel meat hook, swinging it with every ounce of the grit and instinct that had brought her from Lagos to New York. The heavy metal connected with a sickening thud, giving Dong-ha the second he needed to finish the job. When the smoke cleared, the basement was a tomb. Only Dong-ha and Ella stood among the wreckage, breathless and painted in the red of their enemies. The sun rose over the New York skyline, painting the glass towers in shades of gold and violet. Ella stood on the balcony of their new home, no longer a student on a visa, but the silent power behind the city's most formidable empire. Dong-ha approached from behind, wrapping his arms around her. He placed a small velvet box on the railing. Inside was a ring, a black diamond held by 2 gold dragons. "You could have had the American dream," he whispered into her hair. "The quiet life, the graduation, the safety." Ella turned in his arms, looking at the man who had started as a lost wallet and ended as her destiny. She thought of the bartender she used to be and the queen she had become. She had traded her innocence for influence, but she had done it on her own terms. "This is my dream now," she said, her voice steady and filled with a dark, beautiful resolve. And God help anyone who tries to wake me up. She kissed him, a seal of loyalty that wasn't just blood, it was love. Ella and Dongha's journey from a lost wallet to a shared throne proves that sometimes the most dangerous thing you can find is your own heart. Their world is one of blood and silk, but their bond is unbreakable. Now I want to hear from you. This story explored a lot of ground, from the gritty streets of NYC to the high-stakes boardrooms of the underworld. I'd love to know which parts resonated with you the most. The first encounter. Did you love the tension when Ella first returned the wallet at the Jade Room? The power shift. Was your favorite part seeing Ella use her wit to outsmart the Mafia elders? The chemistry. Did the forbidden connection between the disciplined Nigerian student and the cold Korean boss keep you on the edge of your seat? The climax. Or were you cheering when Ella defended the Iron Boss in that final showdown? Drop a comment below and tell me your favorite chapter or moment. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. You want more dark, interracial mafia romances where the good girl finds her power in the shadows. Your support keeps the stories coming.